The day a warrior pulled a blade in our classroom was the day we learned Earth was a death world, and the human girl everyone ignored smiled, because she knew how this would end. Professor Kelmarth had just finished explaining the fundamentals of quantum displacement theory when I noticed her for the first time, really noticed her, sitting 3 rows ahead of me in advanced molecular sciences, the human. Now, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Veltros, a Kalian from the 3rd moon of Calyx Prime, and I had scored in the top 2% of my planet's entrance exams to get into the Galactic Academy. This institution, if you are not aware, represents the absolute pinnacle of higher education across 47 star systems. We are talking about a place where future ambassadors, scientists, engineers and leaders are molded from the finest specimens the galaxy has to offer. The floating spires of crystalline architecture, the zero-gravity meditation gardens, the halls lined with achievements from species you have probably never even heard of. And yes, before you ask, I was extremely proud to be there. The Academy had a strict selection process. Only the best, the brightest, the most diplomatically minded individuals from each species were granted admission. We had Thornaxians with their forearms and mathematical brilliance. We had Piluvians, whose memory retention made our data cores look primitive. We had exactly 1 Kresh, whose species only sent a representative once every 50 cycles. The diversity was magnificent, carefully curated, a living testament to galactic cooperation and intellectual excellence. Then came the human exchange program. Her name was Dakota Reeves, and she looked, for lack of a better term, completely unremarkable. Medium height by human standards, which made her shorter than most species present. Brown hair pulled back in what humans call a ponytail. Clothing that was functional but plain compared to the ornate traditional garments many of us wore. She had these eyes, though, pale blue like ice on a frozen moon, and they seemed to catalog everything with this unsettling awareness. The humans had petitioned for inclusion in the Academy for 3 standard cycles before being accepted. Earth, their homeworld, was a relatively recent addition to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 40-something years prior. They were eager, almost desperately so, to prove themselves worthy of sitting among the established civilizations. The Galactic Council had agreed to a trial program. 12 human students scattered across various Academy campuses throughout known space. Dakota was ours. Most of us were curious, in that polite, academic way. Humans were classified as a Class 7 species, nothing particularly special in the grand scheme of things. Mid-range intelligence. Mid-range physical capabilities. Their technology was advancing rapidly, sure, but they were still playing catch-up to societies that had been traveling the stars for millennia. They had no remarkable telepathic abilities, no natural armor, no venom sacs or bioluminescence or anything that made them stand out in a crowd. They were, as my roommate Pillock enjoyed saying, aggressively average. Dakota sat quietly during most lectures, taking notes on an old-fashioned datapad, occasionally asking questions that revealed a surprisingly solid grasp of complex concepts. She was polite to everyone, smiled easily, and seemed genuinely thrilled to be surrounded by alien species. That enthusiasm, that wide-eyed wonder at everything, made her seem almost childlike despite being a fully grown adult by human standards. The other students treated her with benign indifference, mostly. A few went out of their way to include her in study groups. Others simply nodded politely when passing in corridors. But there was one species that looked at Dakota Reeves differently. The Krevesh, specifically a Krevesh named Thorngrim, who sat 2 seats to Dakota's left and had recently started making his displeasure with her presence very, very clear. The Krevesh were a warrior culture, all honor codes and ritual combat and barely contained aggression wrapped in a thin veneer of civilization. Thorngrim stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous plates gleaming purple-black under the classroom lighting, mandibles clicking with what I had learned to recognize as irritation. He did not think humans belonged here, and he was becoming increasingly vocal about it. It started small, as these things typically do. Thorngrim would arrive early to claim the seats surrounding Dakota, spreading his study materials across multiple desks to prevent anyone from sitting near her. He would mutter in Krevesh during her questions, loud enough for the translator units to pick up words like weak spine and soft flesh. When Professor Kelmarth assigned group projects, Thorngrim would physically position himself to exclude Dakota from his circle, forcing her to work alone or scramble to join another group at the last moment. The other students noticed obviously. How could we not? The tension was thick enough to taste, like ozone before an electrical storm. But here is the thing about prestigious academic institutions. They operate on this unspoken assumption that everyone present is mature enough to handle interpersonal conflicts without administrative intervention. We were all adults, all selected for our diplomatic potential and emotional stability. Surely we could manage a little social friction without running to the professors like hatchlings, right? Wrong, as it turned out. Very, very wrong. The confrontations escalated during our third week of the semester. We were in xenobiology, studying the respiratory systems of methane-breathing species, when Thorngrim knocked Dakota's datapad off her desk as he walked past, just swept it aside with his lower arm, sent it clattering across the floor. Dakota looked up at him, those ice-blue eyes tracking his movement. She did not say anything, just retrieved her pad, checked it for damage and returned to her notes. Thorngrim's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Kravish equivalent of laughter, mocking and harsh. 2 days later, in the cafeteria, he deliberately bumped into her while she carried her meal tray. Hot Peluvian soup, this blue luminescent stuff that smelled like flowers and tasted like copper, splashed across her uniform shirt. Dakota stood there, soup dripping down her front, and just smiled at Thorngrim. Not a friendly smile exactly, more like she found something privately amusing. She cleaned herself up and got another bowl. No complaint filed. No dramatic scene. That smile, though, I remember thinking it was odd. Who smiles when someone is actively bullying them? Thorngrim interpreted her lack of reaction as fear, naturally. Krivash psychology does not really allow for nuance in conflict situations. You either fight back or you submit, and Dakota was not fighting back, therefore she must be submitting. Acknowledging his superiority, accepting her place beneath him. He started taking up more space in the classroom, literally and figuratively. His voice got louder during discussions. He would position his bulk directly in Dakota's sightline during lectures, blocking her view of the hollow displays. Once he grabbed her wrist when she reached for a shared piece of equipment during lab work, squeezed hard enough that I saw her fingers turn red, then released her with another burst of mandible clicking. Dakota rubbed her wrist, flexed her fingers and said, "Oh, excuse me, could you pass the spectrometer when you are finished?" Same pleasant tone she used for everything. The rest of us were getting uncomfortable. Pillock suggested we report Thorngrim's behavior to the Dean of Students. My friend Suresh, a Thornaxian with excellent social instincts, tried to subtly intervene by partnering with Dakota more often, creating a buffer. Even Professor Kelmarth had started giving Thorngrim pointed looks during his more obvious provocations. But Dakota herself seemed completely unbothered. She attended every class, participated actively, studied in the common areas without apparent concern. If anything, she appeared to be enjoying herself more as Thorngrim's hostility increased. That small smile appeared more frequently, like she was watching an entertaining performance rather than being targeted by a species literally bred for combat. I started to wonder if maybe human psychology was just fundamentally different from what we understood. Maybe they processed stress differently. Maybe she genuinely did not recognize the danger she was in. Thorngrim, meanwhile, was running out of patience. Krivesh do not do subtle very well, and Dakota's continued refusal to react in any properly fearful way was clearly driving him towards something more direct, more violent. We all felt it building, that inevitable confrontation. The question was not if it would happen, but when and how bad it would be when it finally did. The answer came during Advanced Molecular Sciences, 4th week, 2nd period, right there in front of 37 witnesses. Professor Kelmarth was mid-sentence, explaining something about molecular bonding in extreme temperatures, when Thorngrim stood up, just stood up, right in the middle of the lecture, his chair scraping against the floor with this awful grinding sound that made everyone's attention snap toward him. His chitinous plates were rattling, this thing Krivesh do when their aggression hormones spike, and his mandibles were spread wide in a threat display. He turned toward Dakota. The room went silent. Absolutely silent. Even Professor Kelmarth stopped talking, his translucent skin flickering with alarm colors. Dakota looked up from her notes, calm as anything, and said, "Yes, can I help you with something?" That was when Thorngrim pulled the blade. Now weapons were absolutely forbidden on academy grounds, obviously, but Krivesh culture treats their ritual knives as religious items, extension of honor, family heirlooms, All that nonsense, so they were granted an exception to carry them. The understanding, the very clear understanding, was that these blades were ceremonial only, never to be drawn in anger, never to be used as actual weapons. Thorngrim's blade was about 10 inches long, curved, with these serrated edges that caught the light as he raised it. The metal was dark, almost black, probably some alloy from his homeworld. He pointed it directly at Dakota's face and spoke, his translator rendering the Kravesh words into galactic common with crystal clarity. You do not belong here, soft flesh. Your species is weak, pathetic. You shame this institution with your presence. I challenge you to ritual combat here and now, so I can remove you from this place permanently. The classroom erupted. Students were shouting, some scrambling backward, others frozen in shock. Professor Kelmarth was frantically tapping his communication device, calling for security. My own heart analog was hammering so hard I thought it might crack my sternum. Dakota just smiled, not a nervous smile, not a frightened grimace masquerading as confidence, a genuine smile, wide and bright, like Thorngrim had just offered her the best gift she had received all year. Oh, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with this strange, eager quality. Oh, okay, yeah, sure, let's do this. She stood up. Thorngrim lunged forward, blade leading, probably expecting her to flinch or run or cry for help. That is what any rational species would do when confronted by a Kravesh warrior with a weapon. Right? Self-preservation is pretty universal. Dakota moved. I do not have adequate vocabulary to describe what happened next. She did not move like someone avoiding an attack. She moved into it, stepping inside Thorngrim's reach with this fluid motion that seemed almost casual. Her left hand came up, caught his wrist, not blocking exactly, more like redirecting, and suddenly Thorngrim's momentum was working against him. There was a crack, loud and sharp. Thorngrim's wrist, bent at an angle that was definitely not natural for Kravesh anatomy. He roared, mandibles clicking in pain, and slashed wildly with his other arm. The blade caught Dakota across her upper arm, sliced right through her uniform and into flesh. Blood, bright red human blood, started soaking through the fabric immediately. Dakota looked at the wound, looked back at Thorngrim, and laughed. Is that it? She asked. And there was something absolutely terrifying in her voice now, something that made my survival instinct scream danger despite her small size. Come on, big guy. You started this. Finish it. Thorngrim tried. He really did. He came at her again, using his superior size and strength, attempting to grapple her into submission. Dakota ducked under his grasp, drove her elbow into what I later learned was a vulnerable joint cluster on Kravesh anatomy, then swept his legs out from under him with a move so fast I almost missed it. 8 feet of armored warrior hit the floor hard enough to crack tiles. Dakota dropped onto him, knee planted firmly on his thorax, her hand somehow now holding his own blade. She pressed the edge against the soft tissue between his mandibles, right where the Kravesh brain casing was most vulnerable, and leaned in close. Her arm was still bleeding freely, dripping onto Thorngrim's chest plates. She did not seem to notice or care. Yield, she said quietly. But the whole room heard it. The whole room heard everything in that crystalline moment of absolute silence. Thorngrim's eyes, all 4 of them, were wide with something I had never seen in a Kravesh before. Fear. Pure. Primal. Instinctive fear. He yielded, verbally formally using the traditional Kravesh words of submission and combat. Dakota held position for another 3 heartbeats, then stood up smoothly, tossed the blade aside, and turned toward Professor Kelmarth like nothing unusual had happened. Sorry about the disruption, she said, pressing her hand against her bleeding arm almost as an afterthought. Should I step outside so you can continue the lecture? That was when security arrived, bursting through the doors with stun weapons drawn, and found a human girl standing calmly over a Kravesh warrior twice her size who was curled on the floor making these whimpering sounds. I did not know his species could produce. The rest of us were too shocked to even move. The medical team arrived approximately 40 seconds after security, which tells you something about how fast Professor Kelmarth had hit that panic button. They swarmed Dakota first, naturally, since she was the one actively bleeding all over the pristine academy floor. She waved them off initially, insisting she was fine, just a scratch. But the lead medic, a 6-limbed Eularian named Presk, took one look at the gaping wound on her arm and physically pushed her onto a hover stretcher. The cut was deep, really deep. I could see muscle tissue and what I assumed were blood vessels, all exposed and damaged. Dakota glanced down at it with mild interest, like she was examining a curiosity rather than her own injured body. She said. That is going to need stitches. Stitches. Presk's vocal sac inflated with alarm. You need tissue regeneration, possibly synthetic grafting. This wound is severe. Dakota shrugged with her uninjured shoulder. Whatever you think is best, Doc. They carted her off toward medical. Thorngrim required his own stretcher, plus 4 security officers to restrain him because he kept trying to crawl away from the humans who were now approaching to assist. His wrist was shattered, his thorax plating cracked, and he was making these continuous high-pitched sounds that the translator struggled to process. The rest of us sat in stunned silence as security locked down the classroom and began interviewing witnesses. Here is what I did next, and I am not proud of it, but I was terrified and confused and needed to understand what I had just witnessed. I went straight to my dormitory, locked the door, and started researching. Earth, humans, everything. The galactic database had files on every member species, of course. Standard information. I pulled up Earth's planetary classification first, expecting the usual temperate garden world designation that most spacefaring species call home. Class 12 Deathworld. I stared at those words for a full minute, certain there had been a mistake. Class 12. The database had exactly 47 classified Deathworld planets in known space, and Earth rated 12th in terms of hostile conditions to complex life. I kept reading, Gravity 1.0 Standard, which sounded normal until I realized Standard was calibrated to the average across 70 species, most of whom evolved on lower gravity worlds. Earth's gravity was actually 30% higher than Kalian normal. Humans lived their entire lives under increased gravitational stress. Atmospheric oxygen concentration, 21%. Highly combustible, corrosive to most biological systems over extended exposure. Native predator species, over 400 documented. Megafauna that could crush bones. Microorganisms that could kill in hours. Venomous creatures. Parasitic creatures. Creatures that hunted in packs with coordinated strategies. Weather patterns including electrical storms, rotating wind columns called tornadoes, tropical cyclones with sustained winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. Temperature ranges from -40 to +50 Celsius in habitable zones. Tectonic activity, volcanic systems, radiation exposure from their sun, and humans, these fragile-looking bipeds, evolved to survive all of it. No, not just survive. Thrive, dominate. They had climbed to the top of their planet's food chain through persistence, tool use, and according to the files, absolutely unreasonable stubbornness. I found their evolutionary history next. Humans are endurance predators. They hunt by chasing prey until it collapses from exhaustion. They can run for hours, days even, at a steady pace that would kill most species from cardiac failure. Their bodies are designed to keep moving through damage that would incapacitate others. Pain tolerance through the roof, adrenaline response that temporarily overrides injury signals and boosts strength. Their healing factor is not fast, but it is comprehensive. They can recover from broken bones, severed tendons, damaged organs, even significant brain injuries given enough time and treatment. Then I found the military history files. Oh, sweet merciful stars, the military history. Humans have been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Continuous warfare spanning thousands of years. They have developed hundreds of martial arts, combat systems specifically designed to disable or kill other humans with maximum efficiency. They study violence the way we study mathematics, and that is just fighting themselves. When they encounter external threats, they get creative. Projectile weapons, explosive devices, chemical agents, nuclear fission. They have approximately 37 different ways to wage war, categorized in the database, and that was probably incomplete. I sat back, my 3 hearts pounding irregularly, and tried to process what this meant. Dakota Reeves was not weak. She was not average. She was a trained product of the most hostile planet in our entire sector, walking around in what was, for her, a comfortable low-gravity environment with no environmental threats whatsoever. We had been treating her like a curiosity. Thorngrim had been treating her like prey. She was neither. The news spread through campus faster than a hull breach vents atmosphere. By the next morning, every student knew what had happened. More importantly, everyone knew what Dakota was. what humans were. The reactions varied. Some species, particularly the more peaceful ones, were horrified that Deathworld predators had been admitted to the Academy at all. Others were fascinated. A few, the ones from higher gravity or more dangerous worlds themselves, nodded with something like understanding. The Kravesh delegation withdrew from the Academy entirely within 48 hours. All 7 of their students packed up and gone, citing irreconcilable cultural differences. Thorngrim's family apparently filed 17 different formal complaints about the human menace before their transport even left orbit. The Academy administration held an emergency assembly. Dean Eulestra, a dignified Peluvian with silver memory marks covering her cranial ridge, addressed the entire student body with unusual gravity in her voice. "We have failed," she began, and that got everyone's attention immediately. "We failed to adequately research human psychology and capabilities before integrating them into our community. We failed to recognize the signs of escalating conflict. Most critically, we failed Dakota Reeves by not protecting her from harassment that should have been stopped weeks ago." She paused, her long fingers folding together in a gesture of contrition. "Moving forward, all species classified as Deathworld origin will have mandatory orientation sessions for the broader student population. We will implement stricter anti-harassment protocols, and we will be expanding the human exchange program. Because if nothing else, this incident has demonstrated that humans possess exactly the kind of resilience and adaptive capability we claim to value at this institution." There were murmurs, some approving, some concerned. Dakota Reeves returned to class 3 days later, her arm in a regenerative sleeve, acting like absolutely nothing had happened. She sat in her usual seat, smiled at the students around her, and asked if anyone had notes from the lectures she missed. I watched her, this small human from a nightmare planet, and realized something profound. We had not been doing her a favor by accepting her into the Academy. She had been doing us a favor by pretending to fit in. 6 months have passed since the incident, and the Galactic Academy is a different place now. The administration implemented comprehensive Deathworld species education modules for all students. Mandatory attendance, no exceptions. We learned about high-gravity adaptations, predator psychology, evolutionary pressure responses, and something called threat assessment recalibration. Basically, how to recognize when you are picking a fight with someone way outside your capability range. The Human Exchange Program expanded to 40 students across 12 Academy campuses. Earth was officially upgraded in status from probationary member to full participant in the Galactic Educational Consortium. Apparently, several member species specifically requested human students for collaborative projects, particularly anything involving problem-solving under pressure or creative solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. The irony was not lost on anyone. Humans had gone from being considered barely adequate to being actively recruited, all because one of them smiled at the wrong moment and then proceeded to dismantle a trained warrior with her bare hands. Dakota graduated top of our class, naturally. She is currently working on a research station studying extremophile organisms in hostile environments. Perfect job for someone from Earth, really. Last I heard, she was thriving in conditions that would liquefy most species' internal organs. We still keep in touch. She sends messages occasionally, usually cheerful updates about her work with entirely too many exclamation points for someone describing potentially lethal research conditions. As for me, I learned something valuable that day in advanced molecular sciences. Something they do not teach in textbooks or orientation materials. Never, ever underestimate someone based on appearance, origin, or apparent disadvantage. The galaxy is full of surprises, and some of the deadliest ones come with friendly smiles and polite manners. I also learned that humans have this saying, which Dakota shared with me during one of our study sessions. It goes something like, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Dakota Reeves spoke very softly indeed. She just happened to be the stick. And you know what the funniest part is? After everything, after the fight and the revelations and the complete restructuring of how we view Deathworld species, Dakota still insists the whole thing was blown out of proportion. Just a misunderstanding between classmates, she calls it. No big deal, no big deal. A Kravesh warrior pulled a blade on her in front of 37 witnesses, and she considers it no big deal. That, right there, tells you everything you need to know about humans. They terrify me. I have never been more grateful to call one a friend. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's kind of the point. Because real danger doesn't always look loud or aggressive. Sometimes it looks polite, calm, and already prepared.